Welcome to Real Estate Coaching Radio, starring award-winning real estate coaches and #1 international best-selling authors, Tim and Julie Harris. This is the #1 daily radio show for realtors looking for a no BS, authentic, real-time coaching experience. What's really working in today's market, how to generate more leads, make more money, and have more time for what you love in your life. And now your hosts, Tim and Julie Harris.
Welcome back. We have been overwhelmed with the positive response we had to a podcast we did about a week ago where we were predicting a 25-year housing boom. And we had a lot of positive comments, a lot of negative comments. A lot of you challenged us to validate or really drill down more on our theories. And so that's what we're going to do on today's and probably tomorrow's show. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going back over the points that we made. We've updated some of the points, but what we're really going to be doing is giving you more facts, because that's what a lot of you guys wanted. Because you too want to mentally and emotionally, so you can financially benefit from what we do feel will be a generational housing boom. By generational, we mean that it's going to last 25 years. So our strongest of suggestions to you is going to be absolutely positively get yourself in a place where you can absorb this information and allow your mindset to, I think, relish in the excitement of what the market is going to be offering all of us for the next 25 years, and really be ready to take action on the content that we're about to give you. I'm really excited about this. I'm thrilled that so many of you are picking this up. I love the fact that so many different real estate news outlets are starting to quote these articles and these points for the sake of everyone else sort of rejoicing in the fact that we're inevitably at the very, very beginning stages of what's going to be a 25-year generational housing boom, something like our country and maybe even the world has never experienced before. How about that for grandiose statements, Julie Harris?
Something certainly to look forward to. And as you said, we have beefed this up with lots of facts and stats. So they'll want to get the notes, because these are talking points kind of to yourself, right? What are you saying to yourself? Are you feeling enthusiasm for the market? They're also talking points for your prospects, your clients. Maybe you're going to a party where you run into people from your center of influence, or maybe you're having a past client appreciation party and somebody asks you, hey, what's going on with the real estate market? So you'll want to get the notes. Tim, how do they do that?
No, that's an awesome point. And to that point, like, I run into people all the time that say, oh, there's a housing crash coming, or, they're essentially carrying around a lot of misinformation about real estate, that once you have the facts, you're going to be able to very politely, very respectfully be able to, I think, give them some counter information that might help them too to see what an incredible opportunity in the next 25 years is going to be for all of us in the real estate industry. So to get the notes, harrisrealestatedaily.com. You just got to subscribe. And these, like I said, these notes are, a lot of details. We're not going to obviously be able to get into the exact numbers. I'm looking at some of these points that we're about to go through, and there's no way we're going to start reading off all these numbers and these sources of the content and all that. So if you really wanted the drill down information that Julie and I spent between the two of us probably 3 or 4 hours researching with a lot of help from Grok, please do go to harrisrealestatedaily.com, harrisrealestatedaily.com. Subscribe. All you've got to do is put in your email address, and then you have to hop over to your normal email and then confirm that you want the subscription. It's double opting in, and then you're off to the races. So even if you're a skeptic, I want you to be ready to receive the information that we've prepared for you, because we have intentionally created these points with the skeptic in mind. All right. So get ready to be challenged. And if you want to challenge us to any of these points afterwards, please do so. You can message us over on Instagram. That's usually the best way to find us. It's at Tim and Julie Harris over on Instagram. All right, Julie Harris, let's roll in. And Julie, I did reformat the original notes. So
do you want to start with the top key takeaways, or should we jump into the first point?
No, let's do the key takeaways. I wrote that for you, Julie, that way, because when you're writing for Housing Wire and National Association of Realtors and maybe Inman News and all the rest of it, they always do the key takeaways at the top. So I did that,
Sure.
So essentially what we did in the key takeaways, obviously, is pulling out what I think might be the most pertinent information to keep you guys salivating for the details. Go ahead, Julie.
Good way of putting it. So yes, as you said, when you listen now, which you are, you're going to be educated, motivated, and most importantly, get into massive action. Why? Because as Tim said, you are at the very beginning of the greatest housing boom in history. So 3, maybe 4, I think 4 key takeaways. 2025 is igniting the boom. Why? We're going to get into that, but most notably demographics, policy, tech, and a $68 trillion wealth transfer, which is hitting throughout 2025 or getting started in 2025. That's the first thing. Second thing is the potential for real estate to soar even higher. We're already seeing numbers above the 4 million mark, which is what we were waiting for. That hit last week. But predictably, maybe 10 million sales, 8 million agents, $5 trillion industry by 2050. Again, we're talking about a 25-year projection here, fueled by 10 to 15 trillion in inherited cash. So you're the vanguard of that. The question is, how will you be participating? And of course, throughout our points, we're going to give you some action steps.
Let me Julie,
Go
let me denote what that point in particular. So I thought about and Julie and I worked on this for, like I said, for quite a while. And we were really questioning the thesis that there's going to be fewer real estate agents because it just doesn't make sense. If anything, there's going to be more real estate agents because AI and tech is going to make it easier to get a license. And so we do not believe there's any arguable case for there to be fewer real estate agents when there's more people involved in real estate transactions, more interest in being a real estate agent. Obviously, there's going to be an enormous surge of potential real estate deals. More demand for real estate professionals is going to create, guess what, more real estate agents. All right.
Yeah,
So
does make sense.
We do not believe even remotely that there's going to be any sort of precipitous drop off in agents. And I guess that's just the popular thing to anticipate some sort of big, agent count apocalypse, but it just isn't going to happen. And if you come up with an argument proving otherwise, I'll be happy to change our stance, but I can't think of one. I just can't. It doesn't make sense. There's going to be obviously a hell of a lot more transactions. There's going to be a lot more money floating around. There's going to be a lot more people that are going to be involved in real estate. It just is going to increase agent count. Loan officers, I'm not so sure about, but certainly the number of real estate agents will increase. AI is not going to replace real estate agents. What AI will allow to happen, just so you're clear, is the creation of more real estate agents, and it'll also make those real estate agents more efficient. So frankly, they can do more transactions because the market is going to be there to demand more professionals doing more deals. That is incredibly exciting. If you're a real estate broker, if you're a CEO of a real estate brand or whatever, start parroting that point so people can get their heads out of their you-know-whats and start realizing that we are all in the right place at the right time. Julie Harris.
Yes, well said. So the third part, of course, is economic dominance. What do we mean by that? Again, we're doing some prequel here, bullet points. Housing's $3 trillion plus annual boost does crown it the GDP champ, building wealth and stability. Did you know that 31% of the GDP is driven by housing? So that's a good thing. We're going to talk more about that in a second. And so your job is to strike now. 2025 is your shot. Buy, sell, join 8 million plus agents by 2050, but don't wait. If you miss this and you're sidelined for 25 years, that could be an entire career. For some of you, you're not worried about all 25 years, maybe the next 10 years, maybe the next 5 years. Maybe this is the difference between you being able to retire with some wealth in 5 years versus just saying, I guess I was an also ran and I didn't take that seriously and I should have. Don't be woulda, coulda, shoulda. Instead, take action starting now. So we're going to get into those points. Your thoughts, Tim?
Well, that last point, Julie, the economic dominance point, and there was another point that you read. I've been really, thinking about this stuff way too much. And if you're looking at this many people buying and selling real estate and the average home being as expensive as it is, there is real estate sales, residential in particular, not multifamily, not commercial, residential home building, residential resale is going to be the largest single sector of the GDP. It's going to be extraordinary how influential residential home sales is going to have on the industry. It might not feel like that now because we're coming out of what really effectively has been a 3-year recession, if not a depression in real estate. But it's going to feel like that. And all the things that have been slowing the market down, when we're going to talk about all, I'm so excited about these points. The lack of inventory, interest rates, lack of mortgage availability, too stringent mortgage regulations, all this stuff. It's all coming to an end now. So Julie, let's roll right into part number 1.
Yes. And as usual, our first point is a little bit of a mindset point. It is the dawn of the historic 25-year housing revolution. This is a bit of accept this. And then the next points, we're going to show you why that is. So buckle up. 2025 ignites a 25-year housing boom, the grandest in U.S. history, driven by demographics, demand, policy, and a crash-proof base. This surge redefines the American dream. And by the way, a lot of the talking points that I was looking at for this, whether that was on Housing Wire or whitehouse.gov or some of the X posts and the Doge stuff, The American dream is becoming more of a buzzword again, which I'm also very
Well,
enthusiastic
the
about. That
American
kind of
dream,
goes to like the collective unconscious thing about it being a positive. Go ahead.
but Jules, the American dream of owning a home.
Yes,
As it was out
specifically.
of it was for a long time. I think for 10 years there were people that were trying to argue against it and trying to argue for the fact that you could be a renter and all these things. And what we're going to do in these points is we're going to show you the economic ramifications of being a renter, a lifelong renter in particular, versus a homeowner. We're going to show you, explain the societal benefits of homeownership in I think a more dynamic, more modern way than maybe it's traditionally been explained by National Association of Realtors. So really, at the end of the day, what we are experiencing is even greater. And Julie, pick up right where it says post-World War
Yes.
II. So post-World War II and all the soldiers and whatnot were coming home from obviously World War II. There was a huge housing boom. That is the start of, guess what? The baby boom, right?
Mhm.
And what happened was the government, and I grew up in one of these neighborhoods, Colonial Hills in 43085 in Central Ohio. And our neighborhood was essentially set aside and created by the I think it was the FHA, pretty sure. And the returning soldiers, and this is kind of interesting, depending on their rank, would determine the size of the lot that they're allowed to have.
And also
And,
what model they were allowed to build. That's
oh,
why
I
the
didn't know
two
that.
stories are on the prettier streets. Did you know that?
Oh, that's true. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they would often go to Sears.
Mhm.
Some of you don't know what Sears is, but it used to be this big department store. But Sears used to sell out of their catalogs homes. You could buy all the building materials, the windows, the wood, the nails, the everything for your house and have it delivered on a train or truck, obviously. And you
Mhm.
and your buddies would show up with your pickup trucks or what have you, or you could hire someone, obviously, and build these homes yourself on the lot that you were commissioned as a result of your service. And that is one of the biggest housing initiatives where it was private industry and government. One of the most successful track records for housing. I have news for all of you. That's going to be happening again now. And it's going to be happening in many, many different ways in many, many different parts of the country. And so that's really the reason that
Mhm.
there's nothing, the only parallel, just to, belabor this point, the only parallel that we can come to anything similar to what we know is about to happen in housing is the return of the soldiers, is the start of the baby boom. So just to be clear, what we're experiencing now, and Julie, I did pull out some numbers. You can see them right there.
Yeah,
And
I think these are very cool. Speaking of housing boom, let's put some numbers to it, right? Again, think about talking points when you're speaking with prospects and your friends. So, for example, post World War II, as Tim was talking about, guess how many homes were built? 25 million in 20 years. Think about how many homes we're going to be building over the next 25 years. So, there is precedent for this, but 2025 will dwarf it with potentially 225 million sales over 25 years.
so
Why? New construction, supercharged by U.S. tech, unleashing economic growth. It's building wealth, catapults real estate into a golden age. This is the beginning of the new boom. And again, we're just going to give you more and more points to support that. But for example, Tim, just as a point 1A, okay.
But
Go
Julie,
ahead,
I didn't write that very well, so I want to clarify it.
please.
So for 20 years, starting post World War II, when that
Uh-huh.
housing boom started, there were a total of 25 million homes that were built over that 20 years. So that was a
Yes.
generational housing boom, right? And remember, we're
Mhm.
comparing housing booms to housing booms. It's projected now, just by the sheer pent up demand and the demographic things that we start on with point number two, it's projected that there's going to be 225 million homes over the next 25 years. And, that's going to be new construction. That's good. Well, that's not primarily, that's resales. That's
Some
everything.
of it'll be new. Yeah.
Right. But that's by comparison, new construction supercharged the U.S. Tech unleashes economic growth, builds wealth, and catapults real estate into a new golden age. So the other thing that happens, and you got to really be thinking about this, is when there's new construction, there's going to be so many new industries and businesses that are going to form that maybe we can't even think of right now. 3D printed homes. I mean, we can grab all the sort of attention grabbing headlines, but there's going to be things that we haven't even thought of yet that's going to happen as a result of this huge demand in housing. And it's everyone always like goes to the infill. They're going to convert the old high school to maybe some of that will happen,
Maybe.
but we don't think it doesn't make sense that that's where the surge of the growth is going to be. The surge of the growth is going to be where the demand is going to be created from these new cities And in some cases, these new metropolises are going to be formed as a result of the massive growth that's inevitably happening in the United States. Julie, let's roll to point number 2, demographics.
Yes. By the way, did you know there's a town in Ohio called AI? It's
I
called
did.
It's the name of the town is actually AI, and they're vying for some of those, I guess, superconductor locations and some of that technology because their argument is we're rural, we're cheap, and we're already called AI. So
Well, but
I don't know.
to Julie's, we're jumping around a little bit, but I think you
We'll
guys
get
will
to point
find,
two.
yeah, we'll get to point. Well, if you look at Ohio, for example, and you look at a lot of these other states, they were left out of a lot of the big housing booms and even economic booms. They didn't benefit. And we grew up there, so we know what we're talking about. But what you're going to see is that's going to completely pivot. And those towns and those cities where there was not the benefit from the last, let's say, 20 years of housing price appreciation, they still appreciated, but not like it did on the coast. There's going to be a huge reversal. Why? Because if you're a chip manufacturer or you're making whatever your thing is, and you're going to want to build it where there's tax advantages to you, the state's friendly, and there's lots of potential employment. And frankly, you can build your facility on land that doesn't cost that much. That's not going to be around San Francisco. That's not going to be around some of these big expensive areas. It's going to be in places like Columbus, Ohio. And Columbus is, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland. There's a hell of a lot of land between those three cities, and all the cities are connected. And it's perfect. It's designed for growth. That's just Ohio because we know it best because we're from there. But every state's basically like that too. I think, to think of Nevada. I mean, between Las Vegas and Reno, there's nothing there. There's Pahrump, right? There's a
I
lot
know.
of
I've got a future point about Nevada, actually, about some of
good.
the federal lands that have recently been sold. Okay. Point number 2. This is a big one. Demographics. Demographics unleash a new 2025 tidal wave of demand. A seismic shift hits this year. Millennials and Generation Z together are 140 million people. That's just in the US. They storm their home buying years, which are usually your 30s and 40s. That's the age that they're hitting now, shaking off 1.75 trillion in student debt. That's according to the Federal Reserve, to form households fast. Meanwhile, 76 million boomers are downsizing, or at least considering downsizing. A lot of the contracts I hear from our coaching clients are downsizing baby boomers. That's very common. A lot of the cash deals are boomers right now, potentially flooding the market. Shortage of maybe 4 to 5 million homes combined with all of this. Again, a 25-year tidal wave. Now, is that going to hit immediately, or is it going to stretch out over several years? Of course, it's going to take a while, and we're going to work through that. But between those two things, you've got the demand from the millennials and the Gen Z, and you've got the potential supply between new construction and some of the baby boomers selling and downsizing, or right sizing, as they say. So you can't ignore demographics.
Point number 3, a 2025 shortage ignites a construction explosion. This ties to the previous point, but there's a real distinct difference. So just to catch up with there's right now a shortage of 4 to 5 million homes just to meet the current demand. And what Julie and I are showing you guys in the statistics with regards to demographics, again, I'm going to say this twice, just to meet the current demand, we're 4 to 5 million homes behind what the market will absorb if those houses were available, they'd sell. All right, that is not even coming close to the actual amount of homes that are going to be needed as a result of the increasing demand from the next generations that are going to be buying homes. So just to get even, we're behind. That means it's going to be a great seller's market with lots of appreciation over the next forever. But then we still have to go through this massive surge of building. And again, this all points to the same thing. And we've looked for reasons to be skeptical and we can't find it. Oh, and yes, we do have a little special carve out for those of you who want to insist that there might be a housing bust or something like that. Yeah, we're going to talk about that probably tomorrow. Because we are trying to cover all the bases, even for those of you who are the most skeptical, because we don't even want our skeptic friends to miss out on the generational housing boom that we're experiencing now. But with regards to the sheer amount of demand for homes, again, we're 4 to 5 million homes short, and that's according to the National Association of Freddie Mac. And then 2025 is our fight back. And for example, Austin right now, we were talking about, it's kind of old news, but they're talking about the fact that the prices have the asking prices have settled down, and the days on the market now, I think, what is it, Julie? 90 days, 100?
48.
How many?
I looked at
40.
it this morning. So the average price in Austin during the pandemic was 700,000. It was like 701. Now the average price in Austin of actual sales is about 605 to 620, somewhere in there. The average days in the market, I know some of you think it's the end of the world, but it's 48, which is a lot longer than 48 seconds like it used to be. And in many cases, especially homes that are priced under that average, under that 600 mark, your kind of starter house 450 to 550, in many cases, they're still getting multiple offers. That said, in and around Austin, which is one of our adopted home markets, we lived there for years, and I'm licensed in Texas, there's a ton of new construction around Austin as well. And there's some infill in Austin proper itself. So the demand is still there, but especially under that average, we're still seeing multiple offers in many cases. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not still aspirational pricing. People are still, shooting high, and we still see some price reductions. It's not happening every time that there's multiple offers, but you can see the impact of new construction. It gets built, whether that's new rehab or actual new builds. They're still selling off because the demand is there, especially amongst that crowd, of 140 million of our younger generations. They're in home buying mode.
So there's a difference between a seller reducing their price and values falling, and it's conflated all the time incorrectly. So in other words, people are essentially assuming those two things are the same. And if you've been in real estate for more than a blink, it's very normal for a seller to want to overprice their house. So if they start out by asking 700,000 and they have to reduce it to 675 to get any offers on it, did the house lose value, or was the seller just aspirational, overpriced to begin with? I think the answer is obvious. And so a lot of times when you're looking at these headlines of prices are falling, asking prices are falling because sellers were being greedy. I mean, that would be the more truthful headline that, of course, none of these housing headlines want to be talking about. And even when you read, they're usually terribly written articles. Yeah. They conflate what is a seller, repositioning their house in the market to correctly reflect the market's expectations, aka lowering the price, with house or with essentially homes losing value. Not the same. Okay, if you want to validate what I'm saying, and Julie and I've done this research, I want you to go to any sort of property records, just stick with Austin, and I want you to find out what the default rate is and how many people are defaulting on their mortgages in Austin. It's going to be an irrelevant number. It's going to be so small.
It's between 2 and 3%. That's
okay.
It.
I mean, so there you go. And that's that's very historic. That's a historical norm. Actually, that's lower than a historical norm, isn't it?
It is. And keep in mind too, just because there are some defaults does not necessarily mean that somebody is upside down. There's lots of different reasons. I every now and then randomly will hear about some kind of short sale or REO from a coaching client. And it's always got extenuating circumstances. It's not because the entire market crashed. It's because that particular homeowner and that particular situation ran into something, maybe they had so many tax liens that they ended up upside down. There's always a story behind it, but it's not like it was, of course, people like to say this time's like last time. It's not like 2007, 8, and 9 at all in any way. So be careful what you're starting to believe if people are feeding you those headlines.
Julie, let's go to point number 4. So I'm going to read point number 4, and then Julie and I are going to talk about it. We've done whole podcasts on this topic. This is a topic that is going to be a explosive topic within the next 60 to 90 days. Mark my word. Our industry, with the exception of Housing Wire, frankly, is ignoring this topic. Julie and I talk about it because we know how impactful it's going to be on housing in general. But the residential real estate agent doesn't seem to know about this, nor does the average, podcast that you hear for real estate agents, all the things. No one's talking about this. But right now, this next point number 4, we believe is going to be the most impactful on essentially housing in certainly the next 5 years, but probably the next 25 years. And here's what it is simply. And I'm going to read you what we wrote, and then I want you to gut check yourself for your first reaction based on what we're about to read to you. And if your first reaction is anything other than positive, it's because you have been watching the news, and the news is going to, and I don't want to get ahead of myself here. Let me just read my point. We'll go back. Yeah. But remember, monitor yourself for your gut reaction when I read this point. Julie, you can read it if you don't mind.
Okay. Yes. And keep in mind, point 5 is kind of tied to point number 4. So we'll make sure we tie those together. Number 4 is Fannie and Freddie, their 2025 liberation can potentially slash costs to mortgages. So as of this year, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac break free. There's been lots of announcements. You've done 2 dedicated podcasts about this with Keith Jensen recently. So if you guys want to deep dive, there's plenty of ways to do that. But Freddie and Fannie will be unleashed for a mortgage revolution, potentially managing $5 trillion in loans. That's from JP Morgan. They cut costs. They shrink spreads from 2% to 1.5% over treasuries. I know we're talking a bunch of financial stuff now. But dropping rates potentially, what's the result of that? Rates can potentially drop from 6.5%, maybe 6.75% right now, down to 5.5%, saving at least $150 a month on a $300,000 loan. We use that example because those are the people who are most dramatically affected, first-time buyers and the lower end of the market. So saving at least $150 a month on a $300,000 loan, you can adjust accordingly as the price goes up. That's your 2025 rocket fuel, igniting again the frenzy. So Freddie and Fannie coming out of conservatorship is a big story that we will continuously be reporting about as the cat gets out of the bag on that, and we have more details. So what is and I think point number 5 is part of the impact of that. Should we go to that?
Yeah, go ahead. Point number 5 is part of the impact. That's the reason I wrote it that way. But let me just emphasize this. So Fannie and Freddie went into conservatorship under the Obama administration, the first Obama administration. And as a result, essentially, the government took over, including collecting all the profits from Fannie and Freddie. Turns out
back in 2008, I think, right?
Yep, that's right. Turns out Fannie and Freddie are some of the most profitable per employee companies on planet Earth. I think they're 3 and 4 or 5 and 6 or something. These companies make billions and billions and billions of dollars. And it could be argued that they never needed to go into conservatorship in the first place. Conservatorship is essentially what it did is the government took it over. If you guys have ever read the book by Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, that's what happened in the book. Essentially the government took over a lot of these very profitable industries. So Fannie and Freddie were privately held companies, and they were traded. The equity is traded on was traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So they were never meant to be in conservatorship for 16 years. So they're going to be coming out of conservatorship. Trump already said he's going to do it. If you're wondering why you're reading these headlines of, Polte, right? Did I say it right? His last name?
Yeah.
Polte. Why he's taken over FHFA and why he's firing all the board members of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and he's doing all the rest of it. They're positioning it to be part of what we are confident, though we've not validated it, but we have a sneaking theory. I'd say I wouldn't bet against this. We think it's going to be called Make Housing Great Again. We think it's going to be, and the very pointy end of it is going to be Fannie and Freddie coming out of conservatorship and becoming private companies again. And what that's going to do is it's going to create more opportunities for competition. It's going to lower rates, because it turns out, no one should be surprised, that there has been a lot of, call what you will, junk fees that have been packed into not just mortgage origination, but also just the cost of getting a mortgage in the first place. So mortgage rates are, largely controlled by the amount of MBS, mortgage-backed securities, and I won't get too wonkish here, that can be sold. Well, Fannie and Freddie could be buying mortgage-backed securities, and they're not. That would lower interest rates. And all these, there's a lot of, I think it was 0.05% of every interest rate on every mortgage loan goes to Fannie Mae. And Julie's point, the next point that we're about to make even emphasizes this more, but here's what I want you to understand. There have been some people who have tried to come up with theories that mortgage interest rates will go up if Fannie and Freddie are out of conservatorship. But when those people have been vetted and their theories have been tested, none of them have proven to be true. And matter of fact, all of them had been proven to be absolutely wrong. And the worst of it was that one of them in particular, that's no longer on the news because enough people outed him for essentially having conflicting interests, who is constantly saying mortgage interest rates are going to go up. It turned out that he had a dog in the fight because of point number 5. He was receiving millions of dollars from being on the board of a PMI company. And PMI is, again, you're insuring the mortgage company against your default, but PMI is a major expense. And if your borrowers didn't have to pay the PMI anymore, that effectively is a reduction of interest rates, and the housing costs will also go down. So Fannie and Freddie have no direct competitors right now. And let's just be clear, without Fannie and Freddie, there would be no 30-year mortgage, 30-year fixed rate mortgage, because the banks wouldn't originate a loan that locks them to an interest rate for 30 years, because they know that if they could move and do a 5-year loan, and then in year 6 you have to refinance whatever the prevailing rates are, they have a problem that over time they're going to make a lot more money. Well, Fannie and Freddie came around and they said, well, let's give a 30-year fixed rate mortgage to U.S. citizens. And I believe we're the only country that offers 30-year fixed rate mortgages. It is absolutely the cornerstone of home ownership. And without a Fannie Mae, without essentially a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, most people wouldn't even be able to afford payments at all. It would be tragic, really. And if you think of all the positive benefits, and we're going to get to more of these, obviously, in our continued points of home ownership, it's extraordinary how much good has come from a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, which you never would have thought of, but it is really true, how incredibly important that is. Oh, and here's another thing. People have been saying, well, the interest rates are going to go up because of, the credit rating of Fannie Mae will be diminished if it no longer has an implicit government, backstop. And that's not true. And how do I know it's not true? Because the credit rating agency Fitch has been asked, and they said even with an implied, backstop from the government, we won't lower the credit rating. And
yes, because of all the underlying factors, there's nothing wrong with Fannie and Freddie. And in fact, even back when it was put in conservatorship, and the argument is, as you said, it probably shouldn't have been in the first place. But during the time, just to bring our listeners who were not selling real estate back then, at the time that was put in conservatorship because we were in that whole too big to fail zone and there were banks that were failing. And you put something into conservatorship to prevent its failure. It was supposed to be a positive move, but it was never meant to be a 16-year thing. But meanwhile, in those 16 years, they've built up all of these funds. It's like ridiculous amount of savings. There's really no inherent risk in doing this.
No, there isn't. And it's interesting too, the profits. This has obviously been something of this has been really it's like an inspector, some sort of like almost a true crime series. That's what I was trying to think of a different. Yeah. But when Julie and I have been researching this topic, it's just extraordinary. And then we were wondering, well, where the hell did the profit from these companies go for the last 16 years? And nobody knows. It goes back to the Treasury. And then the money that was going back to the Treasury from the profit from Fannie and Freddie, the best I could come up with, it was earmarked for specific programs that were in the green energy space. So this money was essentially it could have gone, by the way, the profit from Fannie Freddie could have gone back into buying more mortgage-backed securities and making lower interest rates and doing all these other things, lowering mortgage costs. But they were taking the money, the government was taking the money and doing their little honey hole projects. So, I mean, somebody someday is going to make a really kick-ass Netflix movie on this.
Yeah. A series, no doubt.
A series, and we'll definitely watch it. But Julie, let's drill down on the next point.
Well, so point number 5 is 2025 mortgage innovation opens up the floodgates. For example, you were talking about PMI, that's private mortgage insurance. If that goes away, typically that's $100 to $300 a month on, say, a $250,000 to $350,000 house. Somebody in that price range is going to save about $1,800 a year. For a $400,000 house, for somebody to put down 5%, but gets rid of a 0.8% typical PMI, that's $213 a month. So that's one thing, right? It's savings per month on your mortgage, which actually affects lots of things. It affects your ability to qualify. It affects how your ratios are handled. It affects, the amount you're putting down, lots of different places. But not only that, if you're not having to pay PMI anymore, it actually increases your borrowing power. So for example, $440,000 home, let's see, it gives you an extra $207 in buying power. So maybe you end up popping for that $425,000 house, which is really what you wanted because you don't have PMI in your payment, right? So that unlocks increased home ownership, more sales, better qualifications. And by the way, one of the things that I have thought for a long time has been wrong is as the cost of home ownership, the purchase prices have gone up, nobody's changed the ratio requirements. Okay. So that makes it so fewer people qualify because the payment's so much higher on a higher purchase price, right? So removing PMI is one way to handle that payment issue and maybe the ratio issue since your ratio is based on how much you're going to be shelling out for your house payment. All of these things are related is my point.
And they're all going to be sorted out through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac as the reform happens, and it's happening now. And it's going to happen quick. Some people are saying, well, it's going to take a while. Have you all really observed Trump doing anything slowly? And if you look at the people he's put in place, they're going to definitely take Fannie and Freddie out of conservatorship very soon. And of all the points we've read so far, this is going to be the most impactful, like I said, over the next 5 years. Because here's the thing. We do have an inventory problem for sure. But what we really have is a payments problem. We have a payment. The payment is too high. That is really the bottom line. It could even be argued that we don't even have a down payment problem because there's, if you have good credit, you can get a, low interest or low down payment mortgage, but the payments are too damn high. The payments are too high because they're being stuffed full of all these things that amounts to hidden taxes. I didn't know about all these things until Julie and I started researching it. I didn't know how essentially arguably corrupt adjacent a lot of the stuff that was being packed into mortgages, really truly is. And it's so counterintuitive because the argument is we need to make housing affordable for the first time buyers and all the rest of it, but let's jack up their PMI. Let's make their payment higher. Oh, and let's not change the ratios to Julie's last point.
Yeah, so let's make it harder for them to qualify.
Right.
No.
It's just a bunch of freaking theater. It's not even real. So what we're going to see is an absolute surge in demand. I think we validated that. I think everyone's in agreement. There's going to be a surge in demand. And we're going to see a surge in construction. We're going to talk about that here in a second. But now we're going to see a surge in people that will be able to afford homes. We don't have, here's where my overarching point is. I'd love for someone to argue with me about this. We don't have houses aren't overpriced. Okay. I've heard some very smart people make very dumb arguments that housing prices have to fall for people to be able to afford houses. That's bullshit. Payments have to fall. And the reason that payments are too high right now is interest rates are too high. And part of the reason interest rates are too high is because there's too many garbage fees, hidden taxes that are stuffed into a house payment. It's like when you guys go to, in 2021, we drove, I think, 24 different states with Zoe.
22, yep.
Yeah, our 22 different states. And I remember when pumping gas, which we did a lot, I remember, and you could kind of like, when you're sitting there, you could see the gas price, even from like Northern California to Southern California to Oregon and all these different things. And the gas prices are ridiculous. And I remember when we were in California around LA, I looked on my phone and I wanted to know what taxes, because when you try to decipher whatever it is on the gas pump, it doesn't really tell you anything. So I looked to see what all the taxes were that were hidden in a gallon of gas. And it's extraordinary. If people actually knew all the ways that they're being taxed on the down low, they would be unbelievably livid. Oh, I wonder if there's like, what would happen if gas prices actually fell for the demand for EVs? If gas became more affordable and people were no longer worried about the cost to fill a tank, would that change consumer demand for some of the things that maybe were, and maybe the gas prices are high because they're trying to convince people to have a certain type of behavior that would get them to buy an electric car. Maybe the reason that house payments are too high is because they're trying to encourage people not to be homeowners. And I don't understand why. I have my theories, but that kind of makes sense, that they're trying to socially engineer the next generation of people to be lifelong renters. I think that's tragic. Just putting it out there. That is one of the
we just don't believe in it.
That is one of the tenets of Marxism. One of the tenets of Marxism is not having home ownership or not having property rights. The individual shouldn't own property. There it is. That'll get some cackles raised, but still, it's kind of an interesting, I think, maybe a conclusion to come to. I haven't come to it, but it's kind of fascinating to kind of study, especially when you see that the expenses, as I've just laid out to you, have a tendency to be higher in these states that definitely lean to more of a socialistic approach to, consumerism in general.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yes.
It is.
Well, I was thinking about, I have a friend from one of my previous music experiences who lives in Indiana, but also has a place in Aliso Viejo, which is Southern California, near between Laguna and LA. And she was comparing gas prices from Indiana to fill up her same vehicle in California. In Indiana, I think she's got an SUV, so it's a big tank, but it was like $58. Same gas, same fill up in California was $101. That's amazing, right? Yeah. Because of all the extra add-ons. So at any rate, something to consider. So
but
let's
Julie, just to make this point, in case I got blithering too much and I lost my point in all my ranting, the reality of it is we don't have a price problem. We have a payments problem. And if payments go down, nobody's going to even give a hoot about what the price is. They only care about what the payment is. Matter of fact, if you're buying, if you cannot afford the payments on your local $500,000 house, and I get it, that's not cheap, even if you put 10% down or whatever. you are thinking the house is too expensive and that's the problem. But what if what's really too expensive is all the garbage hidden taxes that's packed into your mortgage payment? And that's what's actually PMI and all these other things. And that's what's causing you not to be able to afford the house payment. Okay. If all of a sudden the payment dropped, you wouldn't not only not care what the price was, you would love the price being 500 grand, if not 6 or 700 grand, provided you could afford the payment easily. Why? Because you're going to have your appreciation for future
That's
years
right.
is going to be based on $500,000 or $600,000 or $700,000. So if houses in your market increase by 5% per year over the next 10 years, and I don't want to jump on one of our points from tomorrow, you're going to build some tremendous wealth just by living in the house. And in many markets, interest rates have to go down to the fives, but in many markets, you're going to be able to live free because the appreciation on the homes, because of the demographic surge that we've told you, will cause the home to increase at such a pace that it'll negate the cost of the interest on the money that you're borrowing to make the mortgage payment. Think about what I just said.
Well, that's right.
And if you're buying a newer home, you're not going to have a bunch of maintenance and upkeep. Like, Julie and I are thinking about putting a new kitchen in our house. Not cheap. If we'd bought a new house, we wouldn't have that as a consideration. So you really get into the mix of all the ramifications of Fannie and Freddie coming out of conservatorship. Then you factor in the inevitable increased demand that we're experiencing nationwide. By the way, it's happening in other countries too. It is unquestionably true that there is going to be an unprecedented housing boom that's going to last the next 25 years. And our next point, Julie Harris, I believe is number 6 is the last point from today's show.
Yes, that's right. And this is one of my favorite points because I'm following this pretty closely. Excuse me. Federal land unleashes a 2025 supply surge. Trump's 2025 vision turns 28% of U.S. land, that's 640 million acres, according to the USGS, into gold. Nevada's Bureau of Land Management sold 20 acres recently near Vegas for only $2,000. You think those houses are going to be less to build with less land cost? Of course, that was just last quarter of last year. They're going to build 210 new homes there. March of this year, New Mexico auctions sold 50 parcels from the Bureau of Land Management, with Western permits up 15%. The Freedom Cities, that's an order that was launching Arizona and Texas as pilot states for these freedom cities. Freedom cities are something that Trump wants to do. He wants to have 10 new, what he's calling freedom cities, that are just brand new cities that are, of course, going to be full of new construction, but also a lot of innovation between how you get in and out of town, how you communicate. Are you working from home? Are you using Starlink? All of these things. So that supply explosion could pave a renaissance in building. And you're already seeing when you and I were working on this outline together, I asked our AI, give me some examples that show that this federal land is already in play. And it came up with the Nevada one near Las Vegas, New Mexico, and then, of course, Arizona and Texas are trying to be in play for those 10 new freedom cities. So I think that's going to be very interesting as well, especially if the Bureau of Land Management is selling this land pretty inexpensively. I mean, how much of new construction is in the acquisition of the land is a lot.
Didn't we
to
figure
your
out,
point of the payments, right?
Ultimately. Didn't we? Right. Exactly. Didn't we? And they're going to get rid of a lot of the red tape. But again, those are tomorrow's points. Didn't they figure out that 50% of the land in the United States is owned by the federal government?
It's 28% officially, but I've heard as high as almost 50%. I mean, I'm sure it varies, of course, greatly by state. All you have to do is fly over the middle of the country to see that, or even flying into Vegas. I'm always amazed at, rows and rows of houses and then desert and desert and desert. Now, some of that has to do with water rights and different things like that, but they're working on all of those types of things as well. So all of this gets down to the enthusiasm for building, the enthusiasm for the market, a new housing boom, making housing great again, and the resurgence of the American dream. And we're going to talk more about our 6 next points on tomorrow's show.
And so what are these new boom towns going to look like? They're going to look very familiar, but there's going to be radical differences. And I'm going to give you guys some obvious ones. Again, Julie and I, we're tech optimists, I think is the best way to categorize us. We're definitely optimists, but we're tech optimists because we think, like, we haven't talked about AI and this doesn't, again, we can bounce anywhere. Julie and I love this topic about the fact that we're definitely in the beginning stages of a housing boom, and we're trying to wake everyone up to the realization that that's what's going to happen. But like in these big cities, they're going to be able to be constructed around different forms of, let's say, communication, different lifestyles, and different forms of transportation. So there is now I forget the name of the train of the technology. Of course, Elon Musk is the one that's proposed this. There are these hyperlink or hyper something or else trains. There's one in particular that he wants to build, obviously under the ocean, that's going to go from England, I think it's Heathrow area to New York City in something like 4 hours. And so when you're building these new cities, you're going to be building them so they're all use whatever tech parlance you want to, but they're all going to be obviously on some sort of satellite controlled hyper or Starlink type connectivity. So we're not going to have to worry about a lot of the bringing in the wires and all the rest of it. So right there, it's kind of fascinating, right? And we're going to, in the lifestyles and the types of homes that people are going to want, if you don't, like, for example, there's every reason to believe that within the next 10 years or less, easily 85-90% of all car sales will be autonomous cars. And I am a car nerd. Julie's car nerd adjacent. That doesn't really warm my cackles because I love driving, but I get it. And I mean, our little girl's going to be driving here in 9 years or 8 years. And I'm loving the fact that if she could just hop into something that's autonomous and take her where she needs to go and not have to worry about getting an accident, I like that. But it's kind of an interesting thing. So if you are now living in one of these new towns and you could go any place in the country on a train, and the train stations and the hubs are where these new towns are. You see how the new towns would become more attractive. Sure. And you now had these autonomous cars. Well, autonomous cars don't need to be owned by anybody if you didn't want them to be. You could have, essentially they could just be, permanent. You could go to your phone, order up a car. The car could then take your kid to school or take you to wherever you want to go. It's also funny, as far as the autonomous cars go and the ride sharing concept, there's new businesses that are already being formed around the concept of autonomous cars. And Elon, when thinking of how he's going to sell his autonomous car, which is supposed to come out, I think, this year, he is already figuring out a way to make it so people can buy like 3 of them, 5 of them, 10 of them. And then those cars are always going to be going around doing, acting as taxis. So people
it's
could
a
start,
mini business, basically.
Right. People
You're an
could
investor in the company. And you don't have to park it in your garage all the time. Sorry, Tim. Garages might go away in some of these new towns.
I know. It's tragic.
But how does that play into the cost of a house? Maybe there's a town where, this neighborhood is garageless because in the middle of the neighborhood, they have a hub of where you show up.
Julie,
to
you would need a hub. You would need a hub.
It just shows up, right?
It just shows up. But listen, just think about this, because I thought a lot about why this is a great idea and why this will work. So I was thinking originally there'd have to be a depot for all these cars to go. They'll never have to go anywhere because they're always going to be on the road. And when they're not being driven, they're just going to pull off someplace.
They have to charge somewhere, right?
Yeah, but the charge ports, you can drive up to the charge ports and they'll either be somebody to plug it in, or the car will basically be able to plug over something and it'll charge itself. But the cars will never have to be at someone's garage or in any sort of depot. They're always going to be commuting around. And if they're made of the stainless steel material, they're not going to rust or corrode or even get any dents. So you're looking at, again, these are concepts. If you start thinking about what does this have to do with real estate, it has everything to do with real estate, because almost all cities and towns are built around transportation. And so if all the rules for transportation are going to change for the next 10 years or less, it is so fun to think about what that's going to open the door to for different types of homes. It's extraordinary, I think. It's exciting. So
well, and think of too, Tim, all of the jobs that's going to create. Just the thing you were talking about, Elon, making some crazy tunnel from London to New York. Well, somebody's got to build that, right? Think about the jobs, think about the economy, think about all of those things being interconnected. So that's one of the reasons why we're excited about where the market's going. So
I heard somebody, we were talking about, because a lot of people, Ray Dalio and other people, they were writing all these doom and gloom type articles and these long form essays and all this. And I thought they were interesting. And all of them, when pressed for where is your reference points, they're all referencing back to Rome. So Rome lasted 2,000 years. It could be argued that Rome is continuing. And it never really went anywhere. It became something else. So there was no dead date for Rome. It just had continued. But how long has the United States been around? Less than 250 years. So if anything, we're just getting started. We're not even in our ugly teen years as far as
we're still a baby country, really.
Exactly. And so, but here's what's really extraordinary. When you try to look for again, I'm always trying to check our precepts because we don't want to be blindsided with, why wouldn't we know that? Because a lot of you guys like to play whack-a-mole with some of the points and facts we come up with. Well, I mean, if you look at the total, I don't even know how to express it. I don't know what the word is, but let's just use, for the sake of keeping things simple, the total value of the United States. And I researched this. I use, AI has been making it so that Julie and I's nerdy, nerdy experiments can become easier and, more explorative. So I wanted to know, what is essentially, if you wanted to put a value on the United States versus, say, for example, Canada, or for example, France, or for example, doesn't matter what, the only number, and I don't even know what the hell this number is 1 quadrillion. Okay. So there's, thousand, there's hundreds, there's thousands.
A lot of zeros.
I don't even know what it is. So 1 quadrillion. Okay. That's supposedly, if you look at the total potential value of what the United States has, we are so much richer. Sorry if that word, gets you the wrong way, but our country is so much richer than even the 5 nearest countries that there's absolutely no comparison. And if you look at the country's growth curve, if you look at our demand curve, demographics, desirability. I mean, did you guys know about these $5,000 golden visas that came out with? Guess how many they sold within the first 24 hours? 1,000. 5,000 times 1,000.
Well, explain what those are. What are you talking about?
Well, I mean, basically, if you have to qualify, you don't just write a check for the, $5 million, but it's a fast track to becoming a U.S. citizen. That's really what it is. So if you can invest, I think it's you and like your family, and you have to be, there's qualifications, but it's $5 million. So Julie, on your phone, do $5 million times 1,000. All right, now it's $5 billion, by the way. So they raised that amount of money in 24 hours. Now they have done, obviously they want to try to get rid of the national debt. When was the last time you heard anyone talking about that, by the way? So they're now doing some calculus and have figured out that if they sell 200,000 of these $5 million golden visas, that essentially the U.S. debt could be largely just it. And so you get rid of the spending, Elon's committed to getting rid of $1 trillion a year in government spending. There's an increase in revenue that's going to come. I just gave you an example of it, to the U.S. government of $1 trillion. And so that's going to be how we're going to get rid of the debt of the $33 trillion the U.S. government's in debt. We have to stop the excessive spending and we have to increase revenues. That's the way any business would think of it. And that's what the country is doing. But this is going to create, because of the desire to reduce debt and because of the desire to increase revenue, the only way for that to really truly happen, it's, in large, meaningful ways, is for there to be an increase in essentially industry, increase in the GDP, right? And so, like, if you think of all these things that are coming out right now about, like, well, there's going to be no taxes on people earning less than $150,000 per year. Now, it can be argued that they weren't net payers anyway. You guys can Google what that means. But I did research it, and Julie and I researched it. I had no idea that a family earning $150,000 a year pays like $33,000 or $36,000 a year in taxes, something like that. Now, that's before they get some of it back from the child credit. And
it still averages out, no matter how they cut it. It's still at least $15,000, which is 10% of their income.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a best case scenario with write-offs and all the rest.
You mean after write-offs, it's still okay. That resonates. I think that's what I remember reading too. But how many people in the United States earn a combined total family of 150 or less? And if all of a sudden those people start having $15,000 more per year that they get to spend on wherever the hell they want to spend it on, what do you think that's going to do to the economy? And Julie read you guys the statistic, the amount of money that's going to be transferring from baby boomers. What was it? 1 trillion, how many trillions of dollars to baby boomers to their offspring? Unfortunately, Julie and I we're a Generation X. So we missed the boat on that one.
Billion. Yeah, a lot.
Yeah. But what do you think where the most of that money is going to go? Real estate, of course.
Of course. We're already seeing that. I have lots of coaching clients who have generations moving in together, where that was the deal. Mom and dad or grandma and grandpa are going to invest in your home with you. We're going to buy something better than what the kids would have done on their own because they don't have the down payment saved, or one of them's raising kids and the other one's working, whatever the deal is. But they're going to buy a bigger house than they would have otherwise. They're going to invest in it together. And that's still a transfer of wealth. Now they're just all on title together, but that still created a transaction. There's lots of this going on right now. And I think that we probably will see some impact in new construction and what types of homes are being built there. But it's all, we're obviously housing enthusiasts, but we also try to check our facts as we go. I look for a lot of evidence of, I call them boots on the ground. All of our great coaching clients and our coaches are always bringing us stories. I'm always asking, where'd that deal come from? Because that's the essence of it. Who is actually transacting today? And I think that's really interesting to track.
So, Julie, let's go back to our key takeaways as we summarize today's podcast, because the first key takeaway, hopefully you guys are feeling educated. We're trying to keep our emotions in check. We're trying to give this information to you in a very, informational format. We're trying not to, it's harder for me than it is for Julie to be overly enthusiastic about this, because sometimes when people hear somebody being overly enthusiastic, that triggers their inner skeptic. We're giving you the facts. We're giving you the figures. Our goal, our mission from this is to help all of you, even those of you who are emotionally stuck in the mud, to realize that you are in the right place, that you are at the right time, and we're all at the very beginning stages of what's going to be the biggest housing boom in the history of humanity. Okay, remember I was just telling you I didn't want to sound too overly optimistic because some of you guys will feel skeptical. Julie, go back to its original takeaway points and let's remind them what that we hope that they would get from today's show.
Well, of course, we talked about demographics, policy, tech, the $68 trillion wealth transfer.
Read the points. Read the points.
I am. They're right here.
Right. Well, okay. So 2025 ignites the boom, demographics, policy, tech, and the $68 trillion wealth transfer, meaning $68 trillion starting this year effectively is going to start transferring from the baby boomers to their offspring. And that's going to, take 20 or 25 years, but $68 trillion in the history of humanity, no number that size, adjusted for inflation, however you want to argue it, has ever been transferred from one generation to the next. Not even in the times of aristocratic royal families and all the rest of it. Nothing like this has ever happened before.
It's epic.
It's epic. And this is democratized wealth transference. This isn't just the upper 1%. This is normal people, who are passing their money from one generation to the next. And a lot of that wealth is tied up in real estate. And a lot of that wealth, when it transfers, is going to go back into real estate. And you have real estate licenses. If that doesn't make you excited, then nothing will. And Julie, the next one, as far as projections, and I want you to really, really think about this. Again, we started out the show by reading you guys this point. We see no even remote reason to believe that there's going to be a drop off in the number of licensees. We do believe there's going to be a drop off in the number of brokerages. That's a different conversation, but it doesn't make sense that companies like eXp Realty are going to explode. eXp Realty is that business model has not only been validated, but it's also proven to be, frankly, the lethal knockout punch to the old school real estate franchise model. And you're seeing it. All of these brokerage models that tried to compete with eXp are all being sold or fallen by the wayside. The eXp business model, primarily because of the cost structure to the agents, but also, frankly, the revenue share model that it obviously allows for, is extraordinary. And so I can't think of a parallel to eXp, another company that's operating like they do that has similar offerings to agents. So just if you're with eXp, go you. And if you're not, we'd love to talk with you about joining with Julie and I at eXp Realty. The link is below if you're on the iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or over on YouTube, or you can just text me directly at 512-758-0206. But Julie, real estate is going to soar over the next 25 years. Back this up with some numbers.
Yes, that's right. So by 2050, we're going to be talking about 10 million in sales, 8 million agents, $5 trillion industry by 2050, fueled by what we were just talking about, 10 to 15 trillion in inherited cash. So the only question is, how much of that are you going to be a part of? How many transactions do you personally need to be participating in? Because there's going to be a whole lot of them. We're talking about by 25 years into this, we're talking about 10 million sales a year. We're all used to doing 4 to 6 million in number of sales per year. So that's more than doubling the volume of the transactions. So yeah, it's all good. And then we talked about economic dominance, housing's $3 trillion annual boost that goes into the GDP. That builds wealth in many different ways. It's not just the equity that you build in your house. It's also all of the money that's spent when somebody moves. There's lots of reports about that I think the average person, after they purchase a home, the first year spends between $10,000 and $20,000 doing stuff to their house. That's also great for the economy. And then, of course, joining those 8 million agents by 2050, you don't want to miss out. And even if your mindset doesn't go all the way to 2050, It's riding that wave, right? That's the saying of all the ships rise together. Ride the wave. Maybe for you, that's 5 years. Maybe it's 10 years. But don't be asleep at the wheel. Be aware of all of these things. Maybe you live in Las Vegas and you should be real frosty about who's building what where out in the desert that you keep driving by and you keep thinking nothing's going on along that corridor. Look it up. Maybe there's about to be a big boom out there. Maybe there's a new town being built outside of Phoenix. Find out and be part of that.
Tomorrow on part 2, we're going to talk about what tariffs, the effect tariffs are going to have on manufacturing and housing. We're going to talk about boom towns, and we're going to tell you where we think they're going to be. It's kind of obvious, but we're going to give you some exact states and the areas of those states. We're going to talk about,
Technology.
technology, new construction, all kinds of different things. But really, we have aggressively looked for reasons. Oh, and I love this. Did you see my point number 11, Julie? I spent a lot of time on that one.
Oh yeah, I like that too. That
Yeah.
really kind of drives the point home. So
I know. So on point number 11, we're going to give you the actual math on a 30-year-old who buys a house today. If they bought a house and put their $60,000 down payment down, and this is assuming they didn't just constantly move up and go to more expensive houses, they're going to appreciate more. Bought a house, 60,000 down, kept that house, and what their net worth is going to be. You guys will be astounded. And we're going to talk about a lot of other great points. So hopefully you are feeling educated. Hopefully you are feeling motivated. And what action should you be taking? You need to be making sure that you are not stuck in the mud emotionally, because you are going to miss out on the building blocks of what's going to be one of the greatest housing revolutions ever. I mean, it's going to unquestionably, real estate is going to be, especially in the United States, residential home building, residential resale, residential adjacent type things. That sector is going to be the largest single growth sector in the industry. I would venture a guess that maybe buying home builder stocks might be a good idea. Maybe buying home improvement stocks might be a good idea. I don't know. Just start expanding your thinking, and you're going to feel a sense of optimism like Julie and I do. In the meantime, thank you for keeping this number one listen to daily podcast for real estate professionals in at least the United States. You guys have a fantastic day, and we'll talk with you on the show with part 2.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.